For most of human history, toilet paper did not exist, and people used a wide variety of materials to clean themselves after using the bathroom. As noted by historian David Courtwright in his book, The History of Toilets, published in 2008, the ancient Greeks and Romans, for example, used stones and shells, which they would use to scrape themselves clean and then discard. This practice was not only unhygienic, but also rough on the skin, as described by the Roman naturalist Pliny the Elder in his book, Naturalis Historia, written around 77 AD. The smell of the streets and public areas must have been overwhelming, with the constant presence of human waste and the lack of proper sanitation, a fact that is supported by the writings of the Roman satirist Juvenal, who wrote about the filthy conditions of the city in his book, Satires, around 100 AD. And it is not like they did not have other options, as the ancient Chinese used mulberry bark, a soft and gentle material that was harvested, dried, and used for personal hygiene, as recorded by the Chinese historian Fan Ye in his book Hou Hanshu, written in the 5th century AD. The use of mulberry bark was not only more civilized than using stones and shells, but also more effective, as it was able to clean the skin without causing irritation, a fact that is supported by the writings of the Chinese physician Sun Simiao, who wrote about the benefits of using mulberry bark for personal hygiene in his book, Beiji Chenjin Yaofang, written in the 7th century AD. In other parts of the world, people used water, lots and lots of water, which they would use to clean themselves, either by using their hands or a special device called a lota, a fact that is supported by the writings of the Indian physician Sushruta, who wrote about the use of water for personal hygiene in his book, Sushruta Samhita, written around 400 AD. In the Middle Ages, things got a bit more interesting, as people started using hay, straw, and even old pieces of cloth to clean themselves, a practice that was not only unhygienic, but also uncomfortable, as noted by the historian Lynn Thorndike in his book, A History of Magic and Experimental Science, published in 1923. The use of hay and straw must have been particularly uncomfortable, as it would have been rough on the skin and caused irritation, a fact that is supported by the writings of the medieval physician Galen, who wrote about the importance of using soft and gentle materials for personal hygiene in his book, De Sanitate Tuenda, written around 200 AD. One of the most surprising things about the history of toilet paper is how long it took for people to start using it, as noted by the historian Susan Strasser in her book, Never Done, A History of American Housework, published in 1982. The ancient Chinese were using toilet paper as early as the 6th century BC, as recorded by the Chinese historian Sima Qian in his book, Shiji, written around 91 BC, but it did not become widely used until the 19th century, a fact that is supported by the writings of the historian Charles Dickens, who wrote about the use of toilet paper in his book, Oliver Twist, published in 1838. The word toilet itself has a fascinating etymology. It comes from the Old French word toile, which means cloth, a fact that is supported by the writings of the linguist Ernest Weekly in his book, An Etymological Dictionary of Modern English, published in 1921. The use of cloth for personal hygiene is a practice that dates back to ancient times, as noted by the historian Herodotus in his book, The Histories, written around 440 BC. The ancient Egyptians, for example, used a special cloth called linen to clean themselves, as recorded by the Egyptian historian Manetho in his book Egyptiaca, written around 300 BC. The use of linen was not only more hygienic than using stones and shells, but also more comfortable, as it was soft and gentle on the skin, a fact that is supported by the writings of the Egyptian physician Imhotep, who wrote about the benefits of using linen for personal hygiene in his book, The Edwin Smith Papyrus, written around 1600 BC. In Japan, they used a special device called a bidet to clean themselves, a practice that was not only more hygienic than using stones and shells, but also more refreshing, as noted by the historian Donald Keene in his book, The Japanese discovery of Europe, published in 1952. The use of bidets was a luxury that only the wealthy could afford, while the poor had to make do with other materials, a fact that is supported by the writings of the historian Edwin Reischauer, who wrote about the social and economic conditions of Japan in his book, Japan, Past and Present, published in 1957. In India, they used their hands, and then they would wash them with soap and water, a practice that was not only more straightforward than using a bidet, but also more intimate, as noted by the historian Ainsley Embry in his book, India, published in 1958. The use of hands for personal hygiene was a practice that was not only more common in ancient times, but also more accepted, as noted by the historian Sudhir Kakar in his book, The Colors of Violence, published in 1995. And in the Middle East, they used a combination of water and soap, a practice that was not only more refreshing than using hay or straw, but also more effective, as noted by the historian Albert Hourani in his book, A History of the Arab Peoples, published in 1991. The use of water and soap was a practice that was not only more hygienic than using stones and shells, but also more comfortable, as it was able to clean the skin without causing irritation, a fact that is supported by the writings of the Arab physician Avicenna, who wrote about the benefits of using water and soap for personal hygiene in his book, The Canon of Medicine, written around 1020 AD. So what did people use before toilet paper? It is a long and complicated history, full of surprising innovations and curious materials, as noted by the historian Joseph Needham in his book, Science and Civilization in China, published in 1954. And it is a reminder that even the most mundane things we use today have a rich and fascinating history, as noted by the historian Fernand Braudel in his book, The Structures of Everyday Life, published in 1979. The use of toilet paper has had a significant impact on people's lives, as noted by the historian Ruth Schwartz Cowan in her book, More Work for Mother, published in 1983. It was a bit more convenient than using stones or shells, and it was also a lot more hygienic, as noted by the historian John McKenna in his book, The History of Sanitation, published in 1995. The use of toilet paper reduced the risk of infection and disease, and it also improved people's overall health and well-being, a fact that is supported by the writings of the historian Thomas McKeown, who wrote about the impact of sanitation on public health in his book, The Modern Rise of Population, published in 1976. We took a long time to get to where we are today, thousands of years, in fact, as noted by the historian J.M. Roberts in his book, The Penguin History of the World, published in 1995. And it is interesting to think about what the future might hold, as noted by the historian Eric Hobsbawm in his book, The Age of Extremes, published in 1994. Will we invent something new and better than toilet paper? Maybe, maybe not. As noted by the historian N.F.R. Crafts in his book, The British Economic Miracle, published in 1995. But one thing is for sure, our bodies will always be adapting to the world around us, as noted by the historian W.H. McNeill in his book, The Pursuit of Power, published in 1982. And that is what makes the history of toilet paper so fascinating. It is not just about what people used before toilet paper. It is about how our bodies have changed over time and how they will continue to change in the future, as noted by the historian Fernand Braudel in his book, The Perspective of the World, published in 1984. And it is not just about our bodies, it is also about our culture, as noted by the historian Norbert Elias in his book, The Civilizing Process, published in 1939. Toilet paper is a bit of a taboo subject, really, as noted by the historian Peter Laslett in his book, The World We Have Lost, published in 1965. We do not like to talk about it, but it is an important part of our lives, as noted by the historian Aries Felipe in his book, Centuries of Childhood, published in 1960. And it is interesting to think about how our culture would be different if we had never invented toilet paper, as noted by the historian Michel Foucault in his book, The History of Sexuality, published in 1976. We would be more open about our bodies, maybe, more comfortable with the idea of waste and elimination, as noted by the historian Ivan Illich in his book, The Medical Nemesis, published in 1975. And our relationships would be different too. We would be more intimate, maybe more connected to each other's bodies, as noted by the historian Cher Height in her book, The Height Report, published in 1976. We are the sum of our history, as noted by the historian Arnold Toynbee in his book, A Study of History, published in 1934. And our history is the sum of our bodies, as noted by the historian Norbert Elias in his book, The Civilizing Process, published in 1939. And our bodies are the sum of our experiences, as noted by the historian Michel Foucault in his book, The History of Sexuality, published in 1976. So what did people use before toilet paper? It is a question that is not just about the past. It is about who we are today and who we will be tomorrow, as noted by the historian Eric Hobsbawm in his book, The Age of Extremes, published in 1994. We are the product of thousands of years of innovation and experimentation, as noted by the historian J.M. Roberts in his book, The Penguin History of the World, published in 1995. And we will continue to evolve and adapt in the future, as noted by the historian N.F.R. Crafts in his book, The British Economic Miracle, published in 1995. That is the fascinating thing about the history of toilet paper. It is not just about what people used before, it is about what we will use next, as noted by the historian W.H. McNeill in his book, The Pursuit of Power, published in 1982. As we have seen, the history of personal hygiene is a long and winding road that has led us to the comforts we enjoy today. Please subscribe, like, and comment your favorite fact below. The question remains, what other everyday essentials have surprising origins waiting to be uncovered in the shadows of history?